I get the sense from your posts on X that for you this is a good occasion, but just start with your reaction to Sam Altman being reinstalled at OpenAI.
I've stated this before, and I can state it again. I'm very happy to see Sam back. He's uniquely positioned for stewardship of this very important company. It's much more than just a company. It is benefit of AI to humanity in a much larger way over the next few decades. And I think we've restored the path.
Mr. Khosla, you outlined a thesis that when the board on Friday, or the board as it was then on Friday, fired Sam Altman, they set back artificial intelligence. Why was that the conclusion that you reached?
Mostly because Sam is uniquely qualified to shepherd this, and he has a vision over the next decade or two of what AI can do. I can't imagine somebody else being able to step on those shoes easily and without a lot of risk to the mission of what OpenAI was.
Vinod, when I posted on X that you were coming on the show, there was a lot of interest. You were the first venture investor in OpenAI, and there was a very specific question posed for you, which is, and forgive the framing of the question, but this is what the audience asks. What happens if Sam Altman gets hit by a bus? What happens if Sam Altman is discovered to have had some wrongdoing? What happens to OpenAI in that scenario?
There are other people at OpenAI who are very qualified to do that. Greg Brockman would be among my favorites in the current OpenAI team. And I think they should de-risk this by adding more people to the team who can step in. But if he does get hit by a bus, I think we would have to do with Greg Brockman, who is very much of the same vision and mission.
Vinod, what we're talking about, I guess, is key man risk. And just as you have, I've been reporting on the story since Friday lunchtime, considering what's happening. But the takeaway has been that the value of OpenAI appears to be the intellectual capital, right, of its people. And when Microsoft reacted to the news, the idea was in the kind of mutiny that was going on that those people would simply go and join Microsoft. And I wondered what you thought about that eventuality, which to some extent now is academic, but there is still a close tie between the two.
I think the close tie helps make progress in AI because it needs a lot of resources. And frankly, I'm very pleased that OpenAI is there, Google is there, and there's at least two major efforts, a few others, credible efforts in the AI industry. So I do think Microsoft supporting OpenAI really helps it move it along, give it the resources Google has internally. And more competition is generally a good thing. And more AIs will make progress move faster. So I'm very happy with that. I won't comment on OpenAI team becoming a part of Microsoft AI. I always believed we would find a resolution. It was only a matter of time. So I had complete faith in this solution. In fact, my conversation with Sam around noon on Friday, when this first was announced, is I don't think it's over, was my first comment back to Sam.
You didn't think it was over Friday lunchtime. It seems like an eternity ago that it was Friday lunchtime when the headlines broke. I mean, it is an issue of the board and corporate governance, right? And what we know is that Brett Taylor, at least on an interim basis, joins the board, along with Larry Summers. For our audience, Larry Summers is a paid contributor of Bloomberg Television. And then my understanding is Adam D'Angelo stays at the board. To your mind, as an investor in this company, you know those names in Silicon Valley. Is this addressing the corporate governance question enough?
I've been on a board with Larry Summers at Square, or now called Block, and I admired Larry. I think over time, the board will build up to more governance, and I think 3 is a small board, but over time, there'll be more governance and better process. I think we've learned an important lesson on governance here. And frankly, I didn't, in my remote imagination, imagine that something like this could happen or the board would do this. There were some errant people on the board who misinterpreted their own religion around EA or effective altruism.
What?
I think this was really errant, surprising, shocking in every way. It was, but totally unexpected under almost any circumstance. And the employees of OpenAI spoke to it by offering to join Sam in whatever he did.
Vinod, I would love to get into the EA and X threat debate. We will in just a moment. But you just mentioned what you see as bad actors. Do you know definitively, as an investor in this company, and you said that you'd spoken to Sam Friday at midday, do you have a clear sense on why Sam was fired in the first place?
I have not talked to the board members who participated in that discussion. And frankly, I have very little interest in talking to the two members that left. But I think it's errant behavior on their part. It was, of course, as widely reported, triggered by Ilya having some concerns. And Ilya has since changed his mind. And I'm very admire Ilya a lot for changing his mind publicly. I think he deserves real kudos for that. But no, I haven't talked to the board directly that made this decision without Sam, without Greg. So I couldn't speak to it further.
And to be clear, you're in the school of thought that Ilya deserves a second chance to carry on or continue with OpenAI.
Absolutely.
So let's get to the debate, the existential threat debate. You know, much of what's been discussed is a philosophical point of difference, right? Sam, at least as I've reported, he's the product guy, right? He leads the global negotiation with policymakers. He is the one that attracts the talent. And the board was, as of Friday, largely made up of academics who seem to have an emphasis on the existential threat that AI poses to humankind. Where do you stand on that debate of commercialization versus slowing down, looking at what the risks are?
I penned a piece for The Information at theinformation.com this weekend on this risk issue and what I feel happened. Humanity faces a basket of risk. Sentient AI existential risk is no different than an asteroid hitting the planet either. There's this risks that humanity faces, this basket of risk has to be balanced against the basket of opportunity to free humanity from the slavery of really bad hourly jobs where you do the same thing for 8 hours a day repetitively for 30 years of your career, or where you can have free doctors available to everybody on the planet, or near free doctors and near free tutors. And my wife's nonprofit, CK12.org, is providing for free tutors to everybody in conjunction with OpenAI on their website and in the OpenAI ChatGPT store. Those kinds of benefits, and including half the people on the planet from the kind of slavery that hourly repetitive jobs afford them, and enough GDP growth to pay for that, those people, is what the opportunity is. So risks have to be balanced against opportunity, and that has been fundamentally missing. There's a very, very high risk of China having superior AI and interfering, starting next year in our 2024 election, with persuasive AI that convinces voters through persuasive arguments and personal knowledge.
Yes.
So there are many, many risks that have to be balanced. Not just one exists from a movie, sci-fi movie, fantasy gone wild, that says robots take over and destroy humans. That's pretty silly in the basket of risks we are actually dealing with, and there's serious risks we need to address. And in both this weekend's paper and a blog I published on China as our principal risk in AI a few weeks ago in medium.com, are worth looking at. And I think they need to be treated seriously, but not this way.
Vinod, thank you for outlining that thesis. I want to get back to the corporate governance, the not-for-profit versus the for-profit. Yesterday, we had Josh Wolf of Lux Capital on the show. I think that's somebody you probably know. And he said the first thing that Sam Altman should do when he returns to OpenAI is take OpenAI public, do an IPO. Your response to that?
You know, I'm not going to comment on what they should do. I think OpenAI is in a good position. It's a good financial position. The only reason to go public would be because it needs more resources, and I don't think it needs more resources right now. What I would say, the structure is not as unusual as people make it out to be. There's companies in Europe owned by nonprofits, or at least significantly owned and controlled by nonprofits. So that structure has existed in Europe before. And I think there's nothing wrong with the structure. There was something wrong with the governance, and I hope over the next year we can fix that.
Mr. Khosla, finally, a lot of people are thinking about the 770 OpenAI employees. One point that was made to me by sources in the Valley is this pending tender presented potentially life-changing amounts of money for those people, and they were willing to put it on hold or jeopardize it in sticking with Sam. Do you know what the latest on the tender is and your thoughts on the staff?
I think it's too early to comment on it, but I don't know any reason the world will be any different tomorrow than what it was on Thursday evening.